Forget self-driving cars. Forget trips to Mars. Right now, the newest and, honestly, the most mind-bending obsession in Silicon Valley isn't about code. It's about kids. Specifically, manufacturing genius babies. Yeah, you heard that right. We're talking about a world that's already here, where parents can literally try to pick their child's intelligence before they're even born. Okay, let's get into it.
All right, so here's the game plan. First, we're going to look at that shocking price tag. Then, we'll break down exactly how the science works. After that, we'll get into the arguments for and against doing this at all. And finally, we'll zoom out and think about what this really means for all of us.
So, first up, the $50,000 genius baby. And believe me, the culture driving this is something else.
Okay, let's just let that number sink in. $50,000. That's what some of the wealthiest people out there, we're talking tech founders, crypto millionaires, are willing to drop for just one round of this super advanced genetic testing on their embryos. For them, it's not just an expense, it's the ultimate investment in a competitive edge. And no, this is not a plot from some dystopian sci-fi movie. This is a real service being marketed right now to a very specific, very exclusive group of people. Tech execs, venture capitalists, and this group of, well, they call themselves rationalist futurists. So who's actually in this game? Well, you've got these biotech startups like Nucleus Genomics and Heracyte that are offering the actual tests. Their clients? The tech elite, of course. But what's really wild is this whole parallel industry that's popped up. These ultra-exclusive matchmakers who get paid sometimes up to $500,000 just to find partners with, and I quote, Ivy League genes. It's a whole ecosystem. Okay, so we know the who and the what, but now for the big question. How on earth does this technology actually work? Let's break down the science behind the headlines. The magic, or the madness, depending on how you see it, is a technology called polygenic embryo screening. It all happens during the IVF process. Now, traditional genetic tests, they look for single big problem genes, like for cystic fibrosis. This is totally different. This tech scans thousands of genes at once to create a risk score for super complex traits, everything from your chances of getting cancer to, yes, your potential IQ. So, how do they do it? Well, it's essentially a 5-step data-driven selection process. First, eggs are harvested for IVF, just like normal. But then, the embryos that are created get their entire genome sequenced. An algorithm crunches all that data and spits out prediction scores for different traits. And then, based on those scores, parents literally choose which embryo gets implanted. The decision is made before a pregnancy even starts. And what does this genetic report card look like? I mean, it's pretty surreal. You could see an embryo that's scored with a low risk for Alzheimer's, but a high chance of needing glasses. And then there's the big one, a projected IQ score of, say, 148. Parents are literally picking the embryo that looks best on paper. Now that's the how, but it brings us to the why. Why would anyone do this? Well, let's look at the arguments for it, because it's all built on this incredibly powerful idea of giving your child the best possible start. The sales pitch really boils down to two big promises. First, health. The idea is you can potentially screen out devastating diseases, or at least lower the risk for things like cancer later in life. And second, enhancement. It's about selecting for a higher potential IQ to give your kid every possible advantage in what everyone sees as a really competitive world. Now, the core argument you hear from supporters is that this isn't really anything new. They say, look, parents already try to pick the best for their kids. They choose partners they think are smart, they move to good school districts. This technology, they argue, just makes that whole process way more precise and data-driven. But, and this is a huge but, this technology is also seen as opening Pandora's box. It creates this massive minefield of scientific questions and deep, deep ethical concerns. Some critics are even calling it eugenics 2.0. And this right here is the heart of the whole debate. It's this massive conflict. On one side, you have the promise of healthier children and optimized potential. But on the other, you have the peril of a new kind of eugenics, the creation of a genetic superclass, and the terrifying risk of unintended consequences we can't even predict. And here's the thing, a lot of scientists are screaming from the rooftops. The tech might not even be that good yet. For something as ridiculously complex as intelligence, which is shaped by thousands of genes, plus your entire life experience, these scores might only explain about 5 to 10% of the actual outcome. So you have to ask, is that really worth the price tag and all the ethical baggage? And then you get to the unintended consequences. Harvard geneticist Sasha Gusev has warned that when you try to select for the embryo with the absolute highest IQ score, you might, without even realizing it, be picking one that also has a higher risk for other conditions, like autism spectrum disorder. We just don't know.
Which leads us to the biggest, scariest societal fear. It's summed up perfectly here by Stanford bioethicist Hank Greeley. The worry is that we are drifting toward a genetically supercaste scenario, where the super rich can literally engineer a cognitive upper class, and everyone else gets left behind. Privilege baked right into the double helix.
And if all that wasn't enough, there's another huge problem: your data. When you use one of these services, you are handing over your family's entire genome to a company that isn't protected by medical privacy laws like HIPAA. So if that company goes bankrupt, which we're seeing happen with places like 23andMe, your data, your family's most private blueprint, can just be sold off like an old desk. It becomes a corporate asset. So where does all this leave us? Well, to be honest, in a deeply complicated, very unsettled spot. We're facing a future that's showing up way faster than our rules or even our ethics can keep up with.
So let's just recap where we are. The science for predicting these really complex traits, it's murky at best. The ethics of it all, a total minefield with no easy answers. And the regulations that are supposed to govern this industry, they're practically non-existent.
Which brings us to the final, ultimate question here. Is designing our children just the inevitable next step of progress, or is it a moral red line that we should never, ever cross? Science has basically handed us the keys to a very, very powerful door. But now, as a society, we're the ones who have to decide if we should open it, and if we do, just how far we're willing to walk through.